Hello, everybody. Just let people come in. Welcome. Hello, welcome. My name is Veronica Santiago Liu. Thank you so much for attending this virtual event organized by Word Up Community Bookshop. During this event, feel free to add comments in the chat panel, which you can access by clicking the chat button at the bottom of your screen. If you have questions, please click the Q&A button and put the questions there so that questions don't get lost in the chat. And if you're coming to us from YouTube, feel free to comment. We'll bring those questions into the chat on Zoom. So, Word Up. Word Up is a bookshop, an art space run by local residents, many of whom are volunteers. We started as a 1-month-long pop-up shop in 2011 and stuck around due to overwhelming community demand. So this June we'll be celebrating our 12th birthday. We can be found at 2113 Amsterdam Avenue at the corner of 165th Street in Washington Heights, New York City. We host events for all ages and sell used and new books in English and Spanish. You can check out wordupbooks.com to shop and see other virtual and outdoor events we have, and increasingly indoor events. We're open Tuesdays 12 to 8 p.m. and Wednesday to Saturday 12 to 6 p.m. We also have a new alternate location called Recirculation at the corner of 160th and Riverside Drive. This space came about because a former Word Up collective member passed away from COVID and left us in charge of all of his books and records, which we've been recirculating as pay what you can books and records. So I hope you'll visit us soon, and thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to welcome Jasminne Mendez, who has done a few events with Word Up, and all of them have been real hits. So I hope that you pick up her other books as well. Jasminne is a best-selling Dominican American poet, educator, translator, playwright, and award-winning author of several books for children and adults. She's had poetry and essays published in numerous journals and anthologies, and she's the author of 2 multi-genre collections, including Island of Dreams, which won an International Latino Book Award. Her debut poetry collection, City Without Altar, was a finalist for the Noemi Press Poetry Prize and was released last August. And I think there should be a video up on our YouTube from an event last fall. And her debut picture book, Josefina's Habichuelas, was the Writers League of Texas Children's Book Discovery Prize winner. Also previously at Word Up, Jasminne's presented personal essays and poems with Night Blooming Jasmine a few years ago in the before times, pre-pandemic. She's also translated the work of New York Times bestselling authors Amanda Gorman, Nicole Hannah-Jones, Renee Watson, and Claribel Ortega. She's an MFA graduate of the Creative Writing Program at the Rainier Writing Workshop at Pacific Lutheran University and a University of Houston alumni. She's the program director for the literary arts nonprofit Tintero Projects, and she lives and works in Houston, Texas. So today we'll be celebrating her book, Aniana Del Mar Jumps In. And in conversation with Jasminne will be Angela Abreu. Angela Abreu is the founder of Dominican Writers Association and a long time partner of Word Up Community Bookshop and all of the iterations before Dominican Writers and before Word Up Community Bookshop existed. She's also a neighbor, and there's been a lot of things that Dominican Writers has done, but I'll let Angie share what all those things are in conversation with Jasminne. And we'll also hear reading, and there'll be a Q&A afterwards.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, everyone, for being here with us tonight. We're so excited to be here. Happy book birthday to Aniana Del Mar Jumps In. Congratulations, Jasminne. I am always in awe with how much work you do during the year. You're one of those authors that I lose count on the amount of books that you put out. You and Adriana Herrera, I don't know how to keep up with you both. And not only that, you don't just write children's book. You also write poetry and memoir, and you're a playwright. And there's just so many spaces that you're tapping into, which I find inspiring. And whenever a Dominican writer approaches me, I'm like, you could do this. Jasminne does it. Jasminne has tried it all. So you could definitely do it. So thank you for being such an inspiring Dominican writer. And welcome. Thank you for requesting this conversation with us tonight.
Yes, of course. Thank you. I'm doing all the things, but it's because I love it and I have so many stories to tell. And so I apologize if I'm a little echoey. This room doesn't have a lot of a lot of things in it, so it's a little echoey. But yeah, I'm excited. Of course, I wanted to be in conversation and have Dominican Writers Association and you as a part of this launch and a part of this book, because you are all things, Dominican. And so Aniana is also all things Dominican. There's water and plátanos and, a little merengue. So, so I had to include you all. And thank you for hosting me yet again.
Always, always. I wanted to share something that folks probably are not aware of about Aniana, and it's where her name came from. Mm-hmm. Right. So Aniana is a 12-year-old Dominican American swimmer. She's diagnosed with juvenile, correct me if I'm wrong, idiopathic arthritis.
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay. Correct.
The name Aniana comes from Aniana Vargas, a Dominican revolutionary and environmentalist, better known as the Mother of the Waters, which I had no idea this person existed. So thank you for that education. She was an anti-Trujillo political activist and a defender of environmental conversation. Her best friend, Maria Tere, in the book, is also named after an anti-Trujillo activist, Maria Teresa of the Mirabal sister. That is so wonderful that you incorporate these, very important political figures into our Dominican books. And it's one of the things that I appreciate whenever I read our books, because we're also learning. A lot of our writers do very extensive research, and to be able to incorporate them into their work, even if it is fiction, there's always some facts sprinkled throughout the book.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I have a very particular thing with names and making sure that names carry meaning. And so in thinking about this book, what I was going to name this character, I did my own research. And also at the time I was like knee deep in my other book, City Without Altar, which is all about, the Trujillo era and all of that. Right. And so I kind of actually came across Aniana Vargas. There was like a posting on Women's Month, I think like 2 years ago, that listed some inspirational like Dominican American or Dominican women revolutionaries. And I saw her name and I was like, oh, this is interesting. And I did some more research, and I knew that in wanting to talk about Aniana and the water and sort of this environment, there was a slight more environmentalist sort of aspect in the earlier drafts of the book. And I thought Aniana is the perfect name. And it's sort of not a typical name, but I felt like it encompassed, her personality. It gave her name and her history kind of a nice backstory. And I love nicknames. I know Dominicans love nicknames. So I was like, you can't say Aniana, you can say Ani. So she's Ani throughout the whole book,
we definitely gave her a nickname.
Gave her a nickname. So. And same thing with Maria Teresa. I kind of wanted to put in a little bit of history there with the Mirabal sisters, and hopefully kind of, subversively excite people to learn a little bit more about Dominican history, which is something that I didn't have growing up at all. All Dominican history I've learned has been as an adult in my 20s and 30s. And so I'm hopeful that little seed will spark more research and conversations.
Yeah, so we appreciate you doing that. Could you share a little bit of the book with us and do a short reading?
For sure. Yes, would love to. All right. So I'm gonna start kind of near the beginning. I don't give away too many spoilers, but just sort of set up the book and the setting for you all. So it's set in Galveston, which some people have feelings about, I have learned. They're like, oh, Galveston. So for y'all on the East Coast, Galveston is kind of like our Long Island, where you go, but maybe you don't get in the water. But I do. So does Aniana. But yeah, we have a lot of similar things, I think, to Long Island in that sense. We even have what's called Pleasure Pier, and it's kind of like where the Ferris wheel and all these games and things are at and stuff like that. So I'm gonna read a little bit about the setting and maybe do a shape poem with you all. So this is from the first section. My island. We live on an island. The island where we live is an outstretched arm reaching into the Gulf of Mexico. Galveston, where the streets are lined with papel picado houses in peacock green and pomegranate pink. Hundreds of shotgun houses where the wind whistles in through the front door and shoots directly down the hallways out the back. Hundreds of houses in sherbet colors that remind mommy of back home. But this is the only home I've ever known. On Sundays before church, I like to walk to the seawall. Sorry, light went out. Alone and watch the sunrise explode in the sky like cascarones on Easter. Blue, pink, and orange colors confetti the horizon and kiss the sea. Sometimes I don't know if the ocean is the sky or the sky is the ocean. It opens big, wide, endless, the way I do when I swim. Sometimes I think that if I swim long enough, I'll reach that cascaron sky, and instead of swimming, I'll begin to soar. And then in contrast, a little bit, I'm going to try to turn the slide back on. Give me 1 second. Nope, it does not like me, so I apologize for that. So there's a poem there about her island, and then there's a poem about Mommy's Island. So I'll read that next. Mommy's Island. When Mommy isn't busy reading her Bible or stockpiling cans and supplies for hurricane season, or banging pots and pans in the kitchen and cooking, she joins us under the orange tree. She sits Mati on her lap, peels us oranges, and tells us stories about back home. When Mommy says back home, she means her island, the other island in the middle of the Caribbean Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. The island she and Papi call Quisqueya. Quisqueya is an island of coconuts, white sand beaches, baseball, and bachata. It is an island where Spanish sounds like a saxophone cut off before the end of a song. Quisqueya, Quisqueya, Quisqueya. Mommy licks her fingers and closes her eyes as if the word and the sweet tartness of the orange take her back to some other time and place. Quisqueya, Quisqueya, Quisqueya. She smiles, a smile of 1,000 suns whenever she says it. I giggle because I think Quisqueya sounds like cosquillas. Quisqueya, Quisqueya, Quisqueya. When I say it, it sounds like a secret that tickles the roof of my mouth. And so I smile too. Back home, Mommy. Back home, the sun is hotter than it is here. It burns the scalp if you're not careful. Back home, the ocean is teal and turquoise, not brown and muddy like here. Back home, I'm surrounded by family and music and bochinche all the time. Back home, I taught my Mateo, mi hermanito, how to protect himself. Mati licks his arm dripping with orange juice and asks, how would you protect him, Mommy? Mommy, we would run in the streets barefoot, but I taught him how to watch for glass and rocks. We would ride motoconchos, little motorcycles that could fit 6 or 10 people in one seat. And I would make Mateo ride in the middle like a piece of lunch meat, wedged between our cousins and me. I wouldn't let him swim in the river or the sea because his lungs weren't strong enough. So instead, I'd let him watch me. I used to love the water just as much as you do, Ani. But then, Mommy sighs, strokes my hair, and hugs Mati closer. The hurricane came, and I learned I couldn't protect my Mateo from everything. Mommy's voice cuts off like a phone call with bad reception, and I know the conversation is over. Because when Mommy mentions Mateo, the tears always fall before she's finished her story. Okay, I'm going to read just a couple more, and then I'll share a shape poem. So I'll be sharing my screen in just a moment. I apologize, it got dark in here. This is not my office. So, all right. Tourists. In Texas, May marks the unofficial beginning of summer, which means college students and tourists from other Texas towns crowd the beach and take up too much space on the seawall and in the streets. The tourists love to dump trash and talk trash while lounging on the sandy beaches of my island. Galveston, they say, and wrinkle their noses as if gagging on the gallons of gray smoke that fill the sky nearby. They edge near the water as if afraid to get in. They're disappointed they're not near blue-green waters like the ones they might find on Mommy's Island. Galveston's water looks brown because the Mississippi River empties itself into the Gulf and all the mud settles here. But the tourists don't care about the truth. They just complain and criticize. Oh my God, the water is so gross. They moan and groan. They tiptoe into an ocean wave and leave more than just footprints behind in the sand. Goddess, I don't care what they say. I love my island. I think Galveston is a gallant Greek goddess who holds history inside her sea-walled feet and palm tree hands. I know she is strong because she is able to survive storm surges and seasickness year after year after year. And then finally, I'm going to do a quick screen share because I have to share a shape poem so you get the full experience of the book. If you haven't bought it yet, I hope this convinces you. And hopefully you all can see that. Maybe it's a little small.
Look at that. It looks like a turtle.
Yes, there are several shape poems in the book, and this one is in the shape of a sea turtle, and it's titled Turtle Shell. Mommy tells me about her Mateo. She says she and Mateo were like a sea turtle, different parts of the same person. Mateo was a soft, squishy center that needed protecting, and she was supposed to be his shell. Mateo, she says, was born with water in his lungs because, she says, grandma had too much water in her womb when she pushed him out into the world. And so for the rest of his short life, he always found it harder to breathe. So mommy used her lungs for them both. She would run races and Mateo would watch. Mateo would skip rocks in the river and she would fish them out. Mommy would jump and catch fireflies with her hands and Mateo would save them in a jar. Mommy and Mateo were different parts of the same person. But when Mateo died, mommy became an empty turtle shell, crowded with a darkness that no light or love could ever fix or fill ever again. And I will stop there.
Thank you. We have a few folks here who were really enjoying the reading, and the imagery, the sounds, the rhythm of everything you share, where the Spanish sounds like a saxophone. Judy says she loves the connection between Aniana's island and her mommy's island, and the verse of Mateo was so powerful.
Thank you.
Everyone is truly in love with the shape poem. I've never seen anything like that, but you know, we love to see it. And folks who are saying we're convinced, we're buying the book now. And Lupe, hi Lupe. Lupe,
of course, he's putting in fun facts about Galveston. Yes, I see that.
The Wall Street of the South, the first city of the Mason-Dixie line to use the trolley, use of the telegram, and where the American Red Cross began. Thank you, Lupe. Thank you for that info.
Yes, it was. Galveston was supposed to be the Wall Street of the South until the 1900 storm came and wiped out most of the island. My in-laws' house and where my husband and I got married actually is one of the few places, like you'll see a placard outside the house. They're historic homes and venues because they survived the 1900 storm when most of the island was completely wiped out because of that storm. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So Jasmine, in your author's note, you talk about being deliberate about the names of the main characters in your book, like you mentioned earlier. Can you talk about, you mentioned the inspiration of Aniana. Was there any other character within the book that whose name came about because you were inspired by someone in real life?
In real life, No, I mean, it's mentioned like once. Patti is her mom's name, and that actually alludes to Patricia, Patria Mirabal, another one of the Mirabal sisters, but it's sort of not explicit. And since her name only comes up as a sort of as a nickname, occasionally here and there when Aniana's father says it, I didn't kind of put it in there necessarily, but it was inspired by Patria Mirabal, which is another one of the sisters.
Now we know you paid homage to her as well.
I did. I did.
So other than the names, you also speak about specific settings, because Texas holds a special place in your heart. It is the reason why you chose to have the book set in Galveston. Can you talk more about that?
Yes, I'm not from Galveston, but I got married there. My in-laws live there, and they hold a very special place in my heart. They're definitely my second parents. I've always had a lovely, wonderful relationship with them. And actually during the pandemic, my mother-in-law passed away from COVID. And so I think part of the ways in which I dealt with that grief was just pouring this story out onto the page and using Galveston as the setting, kind of as a love letter to her, because she lived there most of her adult life, and she had a special place in her heart. And anytime, she really always made me feel like Galveston and her home was my home. Like I really was a daughter to her, even before I got married. She was always super just warm and loving towards me. And so being from Texas and knowing that I wanted to set this book somewhere near water, I immediately thought of Galveston, and just my connection to that island, and really thinking about, right, the ways in which Galveston and the DR hold a lot of similarities, because they're islands, they both experience a lot of hurricanes and natural sort of disasters and things that throughout the years, throughout centuries even, they've experienced a lot of loss, and things like that related to hurricanes and water and everything. And so I wanted to draw sort of those parallels between the DR and Galveston, as well as, right, sort of Aniana's going through her own internal hurricane and storm, right? There's that metaphor of the hurricanes that exist in her life, in her body, with the relationship between her and her mother. That's another storm that brews, and has its its sort of climactic moment as well. And so it really felt like the setting is a character, right? Is a part of the character that sort of lives and breathes and has its own life, because of, right, this water and because of the hurricanes. Even though in the book there's no actual hurricane that occurs, I did also create the setting a little bit right before hurricane season, and then the bulk of the book happens during hurricane season, which is June through November. And so then we have sort of this little bit of aftermath, kind of like the tying up of the loose ends, November, December. But the majority of the like sort of tense, climactic moments happen during hurricane season, June through November. And so that was very purposeful, very intentional. Yeah.
We've had some drastic hurricane seasons in DR. So the book also touches on a lot of topics. You touch on generational trauma, on religion and spirituality, on chronic illness and disability, and the mother and daughter relationship that you just mentioned. Were there any topics that were harder to write than others?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I write a lot about chronic illness and disability just in my other works, in my own memoir and in my own poetry. So that felt in a way more natural, but it was sometimes difficult because I was dealing with an illness that I don't personally have. So I wanted to be sure to get it right. I didn't want to just assume that all the symptoms were the same, or that what I had lived was exactly the same as what someone with JIA would experience. And so I did talk to folks, who live with JIA, and I try to do a lot of research in that regard to make sure that I was depicting it as authentically as possible, while also knowing that these kinds of illnesses affect different people in different ways. So I'm not trying to say like, this is the one way that, an individual will experience juvenile idiopathic arthritis, but these are some of the things that could happen. So that was kind of a little bit of a challenge, just making sure that I had sort of an accurate portrayal of that experience. I think, even though I wasn't intentionally, trying to write a mother-daughter sort of story again, that's kind of where it went. And so I think in this being sort of my first real foray into like a full fiction book, like of this length, it was challenging for me just to kind of learn the elements of plot, and that I can't just say like, oh, and then happily ever after we're done. Like my editor was like, let's tease this out a little bit. Like let's dig into this a little more, and trying to find new ways to approach, right? How can this mother-daughter relationship heal or begin that healing process in a way that feels like, again, authentic, and that maybe kind of shows us the way that it could be, like dismantles the ways in which like grew up, right? Like, oh, if we just don't talk about it, we'll all get over it and move on to the next thing, right? Like, and then it's fine. It's like, no, that we can actually, I can create a mother-daughter relationship where they talk things out, where they go to therapy, where they kind of actually heal and begin to grow in their relationship. And not just wait until, Ani goes off to college.
Not just make them your typical Dominican family.
Typical Dominican family.
It's swept under the rug.
Exactly.
If we don't see it, it doesn't exist.
There were some of those moments, though. There were some of those moments, because, in the book, Ani also has a madrina. And sometimes, right, we have our tias or our madrinas that are the women or the people we can talk to in ways that maybe we can't talk to our mothers, right? At times. And so Ani does have that other adult female relationship in her life. And I think I know one of the questions throughout the process that my editor Nancy had was like, oh, well, wouldn't mommy have something to say about madrina, sort of like having this comment or saying this thing about Ani? And I was like, no, because that's Dominicans and we talk about each other's children, whether we're related or not. And so it's just like, anyone who knows you can tell you what to do with your child, and you just have to be like, I'll see. Yeah, okay, está bien.
Explaining those nuances, right? Like trust, this happens. This
happens. Like, normally we don't give unsolicited advice about parenting, but Dominicans do. So
right. So do you have any sensitivity readers when it came to this disability?
Yes, I had a couple sensitivity readers. And they're mentioned in the back of the book. One was an actual young adult. He was a teenager who was also a swimmer, and he read and actually gave really great feedback and said that it was nice to see a character portray his illness in that way. And there were some moments, right? Because I think we all have sort of sometimes those, we're just unaware, right? We have ableist language that is unfortunately just kind of a part of our language, and just the way that we speak or the way that we think, and ableist ideas. And so it was nice to have an outsider, someone else, look at it and say, maybe think about this or tease this moment out. In particular, I think about Ani kind of being portrayed as this hero because she's sort of doing this brave thing because she's ill, and it's like, let's not kind of perpetuate that sort of idea, and find ways that we can make it more nuanced, and say that, she's living with this illness, but that doesn't necessarily make her a hero. She's here. She can be a hero for other reasons as well. Right. So that was nice. It was good and important for me to have those sensitivity readers to find those moments that maybe I missed. Sometimes you're so close to a story that you just don't see things. Right. And so it's good to have other folks kind of take a look.
Right. So you are known to be very open on social media about your own personal challenges with your disability. And anyone would have assumed that this book would have been about your disability. Is there a reason why you chose a disability unknown to you rather than the one that's close to home?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've been diagnosed with multiple chronic illnesses, but predominantly lupus and scleroderma. And so the reason that I didn't diagnose or give those illnesses to Aniana was because the ways in which, in particular, scleroderma manifest in young children and in young adults is actually quite different than the way that it even affects, like how it affected me as an adult. Usually it's localized to one part of the body. It makes movement and just life in general. It's a very disabling illness when it affects younger children most of the time, not in every case. And actually, swimming and being in the water probably wasn't the best choice, right? Isn't the best kind of therapy necessarily always for a young person with scleroderma. And lupus typically doesn't affect young adults. It can affect a small group of children that are born with it because they get it from the mother. It's passed on from the mother. But typically lupus affects childbearing age women between the ages of 18 and 35. So thinking about the age range of like what kind of autoimmune disease or illness might particularly more likely affect a young person, juvenile arthritis was the one that came up and that I was drawn to, because again, I looked at the list of symptoms and I was like, I've experienced this and the other chronic fatigue and the joint pain and the swelling and the low-grade fevers and the rashes and the skin, manifestations and things like that. And I was like, oh, 90% of these symptoms that JA, patients experience, I have experienced living with lupus and scleroderma as an adult. And so that was my rationale, thinking, right, there's, it's a little bit more of a common illness in young people than scleroderma or lupus, right? And so I thought it would be something that younger folks who have this illness probably maybe have never seen themselves represented in a book. Right. And that was my rationale. Yeah.
Thank you. And also, it's not very common for Dominicans to speak about chronic illness or disability in books. I think you're the second author that I know that has done that. Recently, I went to a book release of a mom who wrote a book about her son, a children's book, and his disability, he has muscular dystrophy. Mm-hmm. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Yeah.
So that's what the book was about, a little boy who is dealing with that and living with that. And I always find it, interesting how we write about fiction, but certain aspects of our lives, like illness, like something that is very real, right? Are often left out of our books. But with Aniana, we're learning quite a bit, right?
Yeah.
So we definitely appreciate all that information. When you mention, you have expressed in the past that you made Aniana braver than you are in real life. Why do you say that?
I think, I mean, she is able to ask for what she wants, and she's able to kind of have this bodily autonomy and say, no, this is my body. And I think, yes, you're my parents and these are my doctors, but I would like to have these conversations about what we're going to do with my body together, rather than people just imposing their will, onto her and to her body as a young person. And Aniana sort of learns this within the first year, right, of diagnosis and symptoms and all of that. Whereas for me, it took at least almost a decade for me to finally be like, especially standing up to my doctors, I think, to really say no, you're not going to cut me open. No, you're not going to do X, Y, and Z procedure, because this is my body and I have a say. And I felt like Aniana sort of spoke up in a way more quickly and sort of with more certainty than I did when I was first diagnosed. And I think that she's not necessarily brave because she's enduring this thing, right? But that she finds the way to talk about what she wants and what she needs for herself in ways that took me a long time to kind of find the strength and the language for. Because, I was just kind of I was diagnosed at 22, so I was still technically, I still felt like a child in many ways. I was still a young person. And so my parents were very involved when I was first diagnosed, and they wanted to know all the questions. And they, my dad was telling me tiene que hacer esto, do this, go here and do that, and I was like, okay, because you don't know, it's all new territory for you. And so you're just trying to find an answer. You're trying to find anything that's going to help you kind of manage what you're going through. And I think that that even from kind of the beginning, Aniana has felt this desire to speak up. She just doesn't know how. Whereas for me, I was incredibly passive. I was I will do whatever anybody says. I don't care. I just want to feel better. But Aniana is always resistant to that. She has her own bodily autonomy. She just isn't quite able to express that yet, right? To find the strength to say it. And I didn't even have that. I was just just make it go away,
Which is totally understandable on both ends. Especially when you're confused about, a diagnosis, and you just, and if you're in pain, you definitely want to feel better. So I think that I would have probably behaved the same way. I hate surgery. Don't, I would have been busquen otro remedio. No hay un remedio por ahí.
No jarabe, que me dan.
No hay un jarabe, un té que no se puede beber. That would have been me. So while writing this book, were there any revelations you came across or anything new that you learned besides about JIA?
Yeah, I mean, I think I learned how to create shape poems, and I'm pretty sure the book designers hate me because
So
it
was
was
that
it was a pain.
intentional?
Yeah.
Did you just have this idea to say, oh, I want this poem to look like this?
Mhm.
Or did you go out there and look for something, different to include in the book?
No, yeah, I having taught third and fourth grade creative writing, and shape poems, concrete poems being kind of a staple of one of those things that I would teach kids how to do, and knowing that they like loved it, like the fourth, fifth, they're good, even sixth graders, like really like kids who don't like poetry, they see a shape poem and they're like, I want to try that. Like I want to make pictures
Right.
with words. And so it kind of started, it literally, I think it started with the sea turtle poem. And then I kind of got like addicted and was like, I'm going to put these wherever I can.
So how
And
many of those are in the book?
oh my goodness, we scaled.
So
I think
yeah,
I scaled back a little bit.
my next question is how much of a hard time did you give these designers? Were you looking at it constantly and say, that doesn't look right? That doesn't look like a turtle yet.
Actually, they did a great job. I'm not gonna lie. They, on the first pass that I saw the images, I was like, no, these look great. I had actually had no issues. Well, the issue was like, it started like we started the drafts in one format and then switched them to PDFs, and then things got kind of wonky. And I was like, wait, I gotta like adjust them on my end. But in the end, like they did a great job creating those shapes. Like I just kind of gave up and just gave them the block of text and said, this should look like a heart. This should look like a turtle. Make it work, you know? So there was that. Yeah, I would say maybe there's like 8 or 10. Because there's also some of the poems also look like waves. Those are probably the more difficult ones actually, because the tab spaces kept getting off. And then when we switched from an 8x10 page to like the size of this book, everything started shifting. And I was like, what happened to this poem? So that was that. And the other thing that I'll just mention real quickly that I learned a lot of interesting facts about Galveston Island. While I was doing the research, I learned a lot about Hurricane George, which is talked about in the book a little bit as I was doing research on different hurricanes in the DR. Because when you're writing a book, you can go down these rabbit research holes that don't end up in the book, but that inform the book in some way. And so I did do some of that. Oh, and the Coast Guard. I learned things about the Coast Guard because Ani's father is in the Coast Guard. My dad was in the US Army, and her dad is in the Coast Guard. And so I had to make sure to depict that experience of being, a Coast Guard, a coastie. That's a word I learned. You're a coastie when you're in the Coast Guard. And I actually spoke to some Coast Guard students that they were in the Coast Guard Academy, I think is what it's called. So that was kind of cool as well.
Nice. I love that. What do you hope readers get out of reading Aniana? About Aniana's journey?
Yeah. I hope that a couple of things. I hope that they begin to empathize and realize that disability and illness doesn't look one way, that there are different ways to be disabled, that there are invisible illnesses and invisible disabilities, and you never really know what anyone is going through. They can look strong, right, and healthy, and normal. Those are all words that I cringe at now. But that doesn't mean, right, that other things are happening in their body, right? And we should be, kind and just compassionate in those ways. And I also hope that they, that if there is something that they want to do for themselves, if they have a dream, if they have a goal, something they're passionate about, that they know that there are ways to accomplish that, right? Even if you are diagnosed with something, even if your body, now has certain limitations, and that you can find ways to do what you love, or find something new that maybe you love even more. Because that's sort of my story. Like Ani has her swimming and she sticks with the water. But for me, right, illness took, theater away from me in many ways. I've been able to come back to it, but in different ways as a playwright versus an actress. Right. And so what are the ways in which we can still connect with the things that we love, kind of maybe regardless of what's happening with our bodies, and sort of, be resilient, but also not just resilient, be mindful, right? And give ourselves grace and rest when we need to. Because Ani acknowledges, I have my good days and bad days still. At the end, it's not a perfect little bow that she's healed and she's better, but that, it's a thing that she's going to have to manage for the rest of her life, and find ways to live with and accept. And that I think, we can accept that things have changed, right? There's also the serenity prayer that comes up in the book a couple of times. And so I hope that they empathize and that they learn a little bit about this illness and become curious to learn more, and again, show compassion to others with disabilities and illnesses.
Wonderful. Are we to expect a part 2 of Aniana Jumps In?
I don't think so, but I have learned never to say never. If this book like pops off and people are like, we want more, I never say never to things anymore, because I said, some of you may recall in my Twitter, when I was always on Twitter, I was like, I don't want to write a novel in verse. And I was real chiflada about it, as the Mexicans say, real malcriada. I was like, no, that's not me. I don't want to write a novel in verse. And then here we are, 3 years later, 380 pages later, and I have a whole novel in verse, and writing another one. So, never say never. I leave the door open. Vamos a ver.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. One last question. So I'm sure we have plenty of folks here who want to know about school visits. Sure, is Jasminne available for school visits?
Yes, Jasminne is available for school visits, in person and virtual. In person, if it's out of Houston, you have to fly me there or give me a bus ticket or something. But yes, virtual and in person. And I would love to come talk to your students. So please hit me up.
Thank you, Jasminne. So here, let's see. We're gonna go into the Q&A now, folks. If you have a question for Jasminne, hit the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and let us know what your question is. We're gonna go through them one by one. So someone says, can part 2 be where Annie gets a Mexican novio? You see,
no,
Lupe
no.
wants you to write a character inspired by him.
I'm gonna say, Lupe, you can go write some fan fiction about Aniana if you would like, and give her a novio. So.
Lupe, you can write your own novel in verse.
That's what I said. I always tell him. I think he's a little salty because I got the jump on using Galveston as a setting, and Galveston is where he was born, and so he's like, "Why you got to use my hometown?"
So let's see, what are the questions that we have here? So we already went through Lupe's fun facts. Kimberly asks if it was difficult for you to publish.
So I'll speak in general. I've been at this for a long time. I know, kind of based on social media and things like that, it looks like, oh, overnight she's got 17 books. That's a huge exaggeration, but no, I have been at this for a very long time. My first publication was in an anthology in 2007. And that one, it says not to downplay it, but it was like by happenstance, because I was taking a memoir class and the professor was putting together an anthology, and she's like, I love your memoir, I'd love to include in the anthology. And I was like, okay. Because I really had no intentions of publishing at that time. I thought that slam poetry, spoken word, performing only on stage was what I was going to do the rest of my life, because at that point I was like, literature is dead. Nobody reads books. Why do I want to just, put words on paper and then it sits on a coffee table somewhere? Even though I was an English lit major, I was obsessed with reading myself. But a lot of the big bookstore, a lot of the small and big bookstores were closing down. People were going to e-readers at that time. And so I was like, literature is dying. Nobody's reading books. I don't want to publish. And then, I saw my name in print. I was addicted. Oh my God. I was like, what? My words on a piece of paper in a book that people could read forever. And so from there, I kind of I got the bug, and slowly started putting stuff out there in small journals, in lit mags, and also a lot of rejections. I opened myself up to a lot of rejections over the years. And then really, because of my book with Arte Público, Night Blooming Jasmine, after I had Luz and was reading picture books to her, I got the bug of like, I want to I would see how excited she would get about certain books. And I'm like, I want to write something that she can, light up about. And so I reached out to Marina at Ante Publico and was like, hey, I've got this book idea. Y'all want it? And I actually sent her like 4 or 5. And she was like, no, 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 yes. And so I will say that all of it is a process, regardless of how many or how much you publish. Like, there's also going to be a lot of rejections and a lot of no's that you're going to get before you get that one yes that will change your life. Because I really do feel like this is one of those that has kind of catapulted me in a different way as a writer, because I've mostly been published by indie presses and university presses, and this is, Dial with Penguin, so it's kind of like a big deal. They're all a big deal, and I'm very proud of all of them, of course. I just, I know that there's like a slightly farther reach in this case, and so, but yeah, I mean, I would definitely say prepare yourself and just kind of acknowledge that there is going to be a lot of no's before getting that yes. And all it takes is that one yes, though. All it takes is the one. So keep at it.
Thank you. So Judy is sharing that our Dominican elders are so stubborn with therapy. So happy that you're including this topic. Have your parents read Aniana yet? And what's been their feedback?
Well, they just got copies because my parents live in the DR. My mom just came in recently, and I handed her the hardback and she was so excited. So she started reading it. They haven't finished that I know of. Yeah, my mom just started reading it. So they haven't given me feedback yet. I'm sure my father will when he reads it, because he always has an opinion. But it's usually always very positive, very good. Sometimes he does say, though, like, why don't you write something joyful that'll be made into a movie? And like, they're all just like waiting for things to be made into a movie. And I'm just like, okay,
where's the money, Jasmine? Where's the money maker?
They're just like, when you get on Netflix, it's just like, it's not how it works, y'all. That is not how it works. Or they're like, why hasn't Jorge Ramos interviewed you yet? And I'm like, because I live in Houston.
Why are you not on the Despierta America? What's going on?
They expect you to just, so no. So yeah, and that the therapy inclusion came a little bit later as well, after edits and revisions and questions, and thinking again, in what ways can we create like a story that feels like, again, right, that looks for that healing in that relationship, rather than kind of perpetuating the same like tropes and stereotypes and things that we are living. And I will say that over the last decade, my mom herself has actually opened up a lot more to therapy. Not really for herself, which is fine. But she uses it as like, she's like, I think that person probably should go to therapy. We talk about, those kinds of things, and having someone to help you through those sort of emotional hardships.
Definitely important. So Yvette Tineo shared that her teenage niece was diagnosed with JRA at 5 years old, and she's not sure if she dealt with the pain and injections at such a young age. She was strong, brave, and as you said, normal as a teenage American, Dominican, Puerto Rican, and Italian girl. Do you think this would be a good read for her?
I do think so. I mean, whether or not she, again, like I said, experienced the same exact things as Aniana, because it does affect different people in different ways and at different stages in their life. I think that there are things that will probably resonate with her. And I think that any young person, whether they have a disability or an illness or not, I think they will see something about themselves in Aniana, right? Whether it's her passion for her sport, her connection with Maria Teresa and that close friendship that they share, eating takis and jumping on the bed and painting their nails, right? Sort of those common, everyday, universal kind of middle grade experiences that she has. I think a lot of students and young folks will identify with. And whether she had injections or takes pills, like Ani takes pills and she's like, oh, this makes me feel horrible. I think there's lots of little moments like that I think will resonate for sure.
Thank you. Stephen Mills asks, since you have written poetry both for adults and young people, could you talk a bit about how that experience differs from how that's been for you?
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I typically, so it's been a lot more fun. I've had a much more enjoyable experience writing poetry for young people than adults. I mean, I think that writing poetry for adults requires a certain like like intellectual arena that I put a lot of pressure on for myself. That I feel like, well, it doesn't sound like so-and-so's work, or is this academic enough? Or are these images like unique enough? And I think for children, I give myself the freedom to really just play with language. And I can really lean in on sort of my crutches, which are alliteration and repetition, because I feel like kids really love that. And so I can really kind of play with language in that way, and sort of not kind of be hesitant to lean into that in the ways that sometimes I do with kind of like my poetry for adults. I'm always weary of like trying to separate the two, because I feel like people think like writing poetry or writing for children is like less than or requires less craft, and it doesn't, because to be able to craft a young voice when I'm 38, to be able to sound like a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old, and find the language that speaks to and creates that voice is a challenge. And so it's sort of a different sort of part of my creative brain that I have to kind of employ in there. But I like writing the shape poems was incredibly fun and exciting to play with. Using the alliteration and the repetition was a lot of fun, because I feel like sometimes when I write poetry for adults, I have to like not do those things to make it sound different or grown or academic or ready to publish, in Poetry Magazine or something like that. And for this, I'm like, kids want a story and they want fun language, and they, I want to expose them to these different poetic ideas in a way that's accessible to them. But it definitely has its own challenges, because there were times where I had words or ideas that I wanted to use that I was like, this isn't going to resonate with young readers. Like, why am I saying it like this? Like, what is a way that I can say it that is accessible to them? And so your word choice I think has to be even more deliberate, perhaps than when you're writing for adults, to be able to craft that believable, authentic kind of young voice, if you will.
Thank you for sharing that. And here we have Francesca. Hi, Francesca. Francesca is the author of High Spirits. And her question is, do you ever get stuck with your writing? And if so, how do you deal with it, especially if you're on a deadline?
Yeah, great question. I'm on deadline right now. I would say that I see my writing as a muscle, and I engage in a lot of rituals that kind of help spark that creativity in many ways, right? Just like sometimes you have rituals before you go to bed that tell your brain it's time to sleep. I have a set of rituals that tell my brain, oh, it's time to be creative. Granted, it doesn't always work. So just caveat there. But right, like I kind of engage in these pre-writing rituals that help my body get into the zone, that involves all of the senses. Like there's incense and candles. I lotion my hands. I listen to a little Headspace podcast. I meditate. I do a little yoga. Sometimes I read, just to kind of get, excited, like to kind of get language flowing. Like I'll read a poem, or I'll pick a book off the shelf and open to a page, and read it. I also, even on deadline, I give myself breaks. Like I pause, like I rest. Like I believe in resting rituals, to just kind of refill that cup. And yeah, that's the other art. I refill my cup by looking at other artwork. I'll look at visual art. I'll watch indie films. I will, I engage in nature. Nature to me is art, right? And so I try to pay more attention to nature, just take a nature walk, or go to a park, sit by the water. All of those things help me kind of refill and spark that creativity. Sometimes I also think that some of those blockages are because I'm not dealing with something on an emotional level. And so then I'm like, okay, do I need to cry? Like I need a good cry right now, right? Or I need to get angry at something, like, and how do I release whatever blockages are happening to me emotionally so that I can get to that creative space?
Thank you. Francesca, my apologies on the title of your book, which is What's Coming to Me. Everyone could purchase it on Word Up, yes, online and in person in the bookstore. It appears we don't have any more questions. We did answer the question about the school visits.
Yes, you can go on my website and there's info there. Yeah, you can also talk to.
Do we have any more questions from folks? Or are we good? So just a reminder to everyone, if you haven't purchased a copy of Aniana Del Mar Jumps In, please do so. You could purchase it at Word Up Bookstore in person or via the website. They will ship to you. If not, purchase the book at your local retailer, especially if it's an indie bookstore. Go support an indie bookstore and purchase the book from them. Idalmi shared in the chat that congratulations on publishing this book. I will share with my sister, who's a teacher, so that she can share it with her students. She did share any advice for writers, words of inspiration or encouragement.
Yeah, I will end, with allow the time that it takes. So I know we all feel like our work is ready and urgent and needs to be published yesterday, but the page will be there when you're ready. So take the time that you need to take to write the story that you want to write. And if you have a desire to tell a story, to tell your story, then you need to tell it, because if you don't, someone else will, and they will going to get it wrong. So just write what you can, when you can. I don't believe in writing every day. That's ableist. But definitely tell your story, if you have it in your heart to do so. And yes, rest, writing, rituals, and refill your cup. So thank you.
I love those. We got to put those on a t-shirt.
On a t-shirt.
Judy says, Felicidades, Jasmine. I'm waiting on my pre-order copy and can't wait to read it. Thanks for sharing your talent. Edward Paulino shared that he's very proud of you. Hi, Eddie. How are you? And yeah, thank you, folks. Thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you celebrating Aniana Del Mar Jumps In with Jasmine. Please share it with as many people as you know, and many educators. If you have a preteen in your life, they don't need to be going through a disability or anything like that. Just, share the love of reading Dominican books, because I'm going to put that in there. Share the love of reading Dominican books with your loved ones.
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure, Angie. I can't wait. I'm going to be out in New York soon. I'm going to figure out a way, and I'm going to be there. So,
well, let us know. Kimberly wants to know an email where she can reach out to you for the school visits.
Yes, I'm putting it in the chat. Book Jasminne Mendez at gmail.com. Yes, book Jasminne Mendez. Yeah, with 2 N's and an E. Yes, you can. Please do. I think you're muted. There you go.
Oh, thank you both so much for this wonderful conversation. Those were great questions, Angie, and those were great answers, Jasmine. I'm really excited to review everything too and watch this again and share it with people. And I hope everybody will buy all of Jasmine's books, and
it's a lot, but
yeah. And also check out our other events where you can follow us at Word Up Books. You can follow at Dominican Writers, and Jasmine has dropped the email book Jasminne BOOKJasminnenMendez at gmail.com and hope everybody has a good evening, and we'll see you all soon.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you, Word Up. Thank you, Jasmine.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Everyone, who's still here? I realize I'm not the host, so I can't actually end this webinar. That's why I'm still here. How can I end this without being the host?